Hey, talking about this video and just kind of doing some of the numbers, researching it a little bit before we started out, brought back a lot of memories. It's going back to the late 90s when I moved to the UP in Michigan, was able to acquire 120 acres and really start carving out food plots with a chainsaw, throwing logs off the side, throwing lime down. I talk about spreading 65 tons of lime over about an 8-year period, all 50-pound bags. And some of that was through a PTO mounted broadcaster, probably 35, 40 pounds or 40 tons. But a lot of it was opening the bag and walking with it. And you learn pretty quick that 5 feet by 100 feet is 2 tons per acre when you spread that one 50-pound bag on the ground. So a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, literally, to get these plots in, even to the point where it was very discouraging because in '99, when I had a forester / conservation forester writing plans and, trying to help you with deer habitat and wildlife habitat, when I showed them some of these locations and I showed them the property, this person said, there's no way you're ever going to get a food plot to grow here. And it was very discouraging. I wanted to plant food plots. I started planting food plots in '95 in the Thumb area of Michigan on land I owned then, my first land I ever bought on the Cass River near Cass City off Argyle Road. And it was, I remember that day, it just was kind of defeating. I was so excited to have them come out. Luckily, I talked to Jim Isleb at the Soil Extension Office in Elgin County, and he really gave me the basics of food plotting and told me, really it boils down to timing for the type of seeds you have, getting good seed to soil contact, getting rid of weeds, getting your pH level up, and planting at a time that could help you take advantage of seasonal moisture patterns. You do that, you can get corn to grow in sand if you apply enough fertilizer, get the pH right, and you get enough rain on, and you plant the variety for the amount of days you need for growing. So the discouragement and sadness, it was really a letdown by someone who didn't have the experience to make that kind of advice in the first place, really turned into excitement when I actually got a hold of someone in Jim Isleb that knew what they were talking about. But I'll tell you, some of these soil tests to begin with, I want to tell you how I used basic seed blends to change the soil. We'll talk about what basic means, just the basics, and how if you're not using the basics, it can really hurt you or not help you as much as you would think. And we'll go through here. And I just want to go by pure numbers. This is an article. If you look up improving poor soils for food plots, you'll find this article. It's an old article. I originally published this in Quality Whitetails of the QDMA magazine back in the early to mid 2000s. I started writing for them in 2004. I think was my first article, right around that time frame in 2004, maybe the end of 2003. I wrote for Michigan Out of Doors before that, but I talked about this, how it really changed, the property, the deer herd, and how everything was built on this food and what it did. But boy, I had bad soil to begin with. And I'll even talk about that bad soil. 2002, I'll talk about the back plot that we called. That was one I went out there in the forester shed. I said I should literally plant rows of pines. I'd never get food plot to grow. And the pH started at 5. In 9 months of planting a heavy dose of rye and then buckwheat during the summertime, that was it. And then applying 4 tons of lime per acre, powdered lime that I just threw on the ground to get it on there. So really didn't take that much. This was starting in 2002. A lot of people don't realize that first started planting in '95, but I was experimenting and playing around with food plots. That's why I came up with my own food plot company in blends. I've been helping John Comp out north with Whitetail come up with his mixes, helped him his original mixes, and I want to do my own now. And John's been gracious enough to ship that out and put those together. But these are my personal blends, and they're based on what goes back a long time, and some of these soil boosters are in here. But this started at 5, went to 6.5. In 9 months, went to 6.5. Phosphorus levels, 5 parts per million. Folks, that's really low. Move that to 12 parts per million. That was in 9 months. Again, all these are 9 months. Potassium, 10 parts per million to 42. That's how much it changed in 9 months. Calcium, 50 to 278 parts per million. Magnesium, 5 parts per million to 110 parts per million. That's how much the soil changed in just 9 months. What's really cool about this? The soil recommendations originally were over 600 pounds per acre of fertilizer added. But you know what? When you add good organic matter back into the soil by the actual crops that you plant, like a heavy dose of rye, a heavy dose of buckwheat, then you can change this parts per million so that my fertilizer recommendations were cut to roughly 40%, under 250 pounds per acre instead of 600 pounds per acre in just a year. because the soil changed that much that quickly. No, you're not going to build topsoil. Topsoil takes about 80 to 100 years by all accounts to build an inch of topsoil. So it's not something you're going to build topsoil. You're just changing the organic matter and the nutrients that are in the soil that can be used by those plants. And it can be used by the plants because you've changed the pH level. Or in our case, I get sick of spreading lime nowadays. If I have a machine to come out here and spread it, that's one thing. But bottom line is this year we used, and last year and the year before, we used a lot of Plot Start. Plot Start gets our nutrients in the condition of the soil condition so it can release those nutrients to the plant. It doesn't change pH. That's one way for those plants to uptake the nutrients. We use Plot Start and spray a 2.5 gallon jug per acre per 1 point of pH we want to change it, and it makes it a lot easier to spray it on there. But bottom line is, change pH, rotate the correct crops, and you get incredible results. What's really cool is that's the back plot. That was a 9-month. We had another plot called the Creek plot established in 99. In 99, pH was 4.1. 3 years later, after applying 4 tons of lime per acre and practicing these rotations, by the second year I was able to use clover. I use clover on one half, let it grow on the other. I'd rip it up, again plant that base of rye, buckwheat in the summertime, and then clover again. But just with simple crops, was able to change it. Think about this, in 3 years pH went from 4.1 to 6.9. Phosphorus, 4 parts per million to 46. All these had similar beginnings to the actual back plot. You can see the parts per million are pretty similar across the board for the starting point, even though they're about 500 yards apart. But phosphorus went from 4 parts per million to 46. Potassium, 20 to 58 parts per million. Calcium, 50 to 555. And magnesium, 5 to 200. What I found about 3 years after that, it'd get down in the high 5s. I'd have to add another ton of lime instead of 4 tons, 4 to 5 tons. So there was that maintenance amount of lime, but man, the changes were drastic. The amount of fertilizer I had to add was drastic. And to be honest, that 650 pound fertilizer recommendation, I couldn't afford. I'd put 200-300 pounds on at the most, and even then it was really stretching it for what I could afford. So it's pretty cool when it came down to the level I could afford a few years later, just by simply practicing good soil builder planting along with that pH, getting the pH corrected. Just the basics. There's a lot of soil builders out there that have 10 different plants in them. There's some, would you believe it or not, that have 18 to 20 or more. If there's a part of that that does something, kind of that jack of all trades, master of none, you're really not improving the overall quality of your soil that much. You might change it a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, but you're not changing it completely. I want good amounts of organic matter. You know what was taught to me back in the late 90s when I started doing this as far as changing soil? Really bad soil, because my first food plots were in the Thumb area of Michigan on great soil. That's a little bit different. But when you have bad soil and you want to change it, I was taught use the classic rotations of buckwheat and rye that's been used for decades. It works, just the basics. That means all the properties of buckwheat that are good go into the soil because I'm using a whole crop of buckwheat. I'm not diluting it with anything else. This crop, sun hemp, supposed to pull out of the ground 20 feet down and provide this. If it gets eaten down to the dirt and deer eat it and they use it, you're not really getting that soil builder property. Rye can actually have some negative return if you leave the 4 to 5 foot stalks on the ground until the end of the summer. There's a lot of talk about, we'll just push that down, but actually there's some good articles out there. Check them out. You can just Google it. I hate saying just Google it, but you can Google it. It's kind of like people ask me, do you have any videos on YouTube for this? Just Google it, YouTube it, search it. You can find it so fast, faster than it takes me to type it, faster than it takes you to type your question. You can get those answers a lot. And when it comes to rye, if you let that rye go to 4 to 5, 6 feet and then you mow it down or roll it down, you're actually damaging the soil because it takes a lot out of the soil to break down those stalks of rye that are in there. Not the organic matter of the root system inside. That's what you build it to. So that's why I always take care of my rye in the spring. You either mow it out, spray it out, kill it. It's already done its job then. It's already had a weed suppressant. It gets 18 inches high, get rid of it, not 5 feet high. Don't wait till it gets to that time. Free seed's not necessarily a good thing. Anything free, there's always a cost. So when you have free seed going into August because you let your rye stand to 5, 6 feet tall, it's not necessarily a good thing. It takes out of the soil, no different than putting woody debris from logging on your soil. You hire a big forestry mulcher to go in and chip up your food plot, and they leave the chips on there. It takes years to break down those chips, and it takes nutrients out of the soil to break down those chips. So you're starting from a fresh slate. It doesn't matter if it's sand. In my case, it was sand. But I'm just using those crop rotations. You're terminating it when it needs to be terminated, and it's amazing what can be built. Check out ag. Farmers are good. It's a good way to look at farmers. When they're building a soil, you know what they do? Like say an 80-acre field. They're going to put corn in the following year. It's been rotation of wheat, corn, beans, whatever. The soil is compacted. They want to improve the soil. They want to put free nitrogen in the soil for the following year. They use tillage radish. Tillage radish gets into the soil. It rots underneath the soil in the spring, fall planted, of course, rots in the spring, creates a rotting husk under the soil, and creates a nitrogen pocket that can be tapped into by the following crop like corn. It also lifts the soil and avoids compaction. So it's doing a lot of things all at once, but they're not saying, well, buckwheat's good, sun hemp's good, rye's good, wheat's good, so let's mix it all together. That's not the way it works, because then they each fight each other and take from each other. Kitchen sink blends. It's not a good thing. It looks like you're smart when people mix that. They talk about this can do that, that can do that, and you get sucked into planting it. Someone like Brandon from First Choice Food Plots, he won't even plant those mixes because it's such a waste of time. Especially a lot of times they have big seeds, small seeds, they don't go through a planter anyways, but they're just a waste. You want to plant single varieties to improve your soil, and this is a great way to do so, and then you can start to incorporate into that. But again, farmers, tillage radish, they'll plant 80 acres of tillage radish or more to improve that entire field. They're not mixing anything with it. We, of course, are a little bit different. We want to actually have an attraction for deer. And so I've found you're improving soil. You're trying to do so with minimal tillage, because tillage dries out the soil, breaks up that top layer of soil around here, creates huge opportunities for erosion. I have corn growing on my property in about 15 different locations around the farm because my neighbor's farm fields eroded up to 1.5 feet deep and went onto my property, bringing weed seeds and soil that smothered my switchgrass. Now I have corn growing that's up to my shoulder high now that came off their crops because of erosion, because of deep tillage and chisel plowing. Again, I don't want to do that with food plots. It's a little bit different. They're playing cash crop. They need to make money. They're good farmers. I'm not going to make any money planting food plots. I'm already in the red. I just want to have good food plots, and so I need to attract deer. So I can't just plant, well, rye's a good soil builder, so I just plant that every year and build the soil. No, folks, there's so much more you can do. But that doesn't mean you need to bring in 10, 12, 15 different seeds or 20 to do so. You're just diluting the good properties of each one of those. So what kind of mix are you planting? Your blends. What are they doing for you? Again, if you're mixing brassica and grains, that's one way you look at it and say, this is a bad seed mix. Ryegrass, bad seed mix. You're just trying to get something green at that point. And just because it's green doesn't mean it's doing anything for the deer or the soil. So I love buckwheat during the summertime. I still use buckwheat on all my crops here in the summertime, all my food plots. You can take areas of corn where you have corn on top of corn on top of corn. Farmers aren't going in there and planting tillage radish in spring or oats or rye. But you can do that. We can do that as food plotters. It's cost effective for us because we're already in the red. We're just trying to improve our food plots and soil. So that's why with my own blend that I planted, using this experience going back to the end of the 90s and knowing what it took to build my soil and seeing results. I'm not saying there couldn't have been better results using somewhere else, but these are decades proven tactics that are hard to argue with, the results and these hard numbers from soil tests published. So that's why I like my brassica blend. I call it Big Boost Brassica Blend because I want to boost the soil. Brassica takes from the soil. Rape, radish, canola, kale, turnip, most of it takes from the soil. One of those that doesn't, though, is tillage radish. It's an early season attraction. The greens are attracted. So that's why my blends are a little bit more expensive, because I have a high percentage in this brassica blend that is tillage radish. It's attractive to deer. It's early to late attraction, covers it. It grows quickly. It lifts the soil and it builds the soil. So that's 50% of the mix right there. Not giving out any secrets. You can see that on the back. But it's an important part of building soil. And then you can have a great quality brassica blend on top of that with no dwarf Essex rape or smaller rapes, no kale or canola that's not attractive, not too much purple top turnip or green globe, just the right amount to still have some late season attraction, late season bulbs without sacrificing your early and mid season. You need to establish a pattern of use, so it needs to be attractive early. That's why I call it Big Boost Brassica, because there is a boost to your soil, unlike most brassica mixes are taken from the soil. fall power greens. Call it power greens because it's boosting your soil again. Has buckwheat in it, tillage radish, and peas. They each do a different thing. What's nice about peas, they're a legume. They don't compete with brassica. That's why we learned in '99 that you could mix the two, brassica and clover. Started doing that a long time ago, so you could have that basic clover the following year. So what's really nice is peas are not competing with brassica. At the same time, the buckwheat that's in this mix, great soil builder with organic matter with the weeds with the roots system down below, but it's got a good weed suppressant because it's a smother crop. It does compete with the tillage radish, but not the peas. It dies with the first frost, the first hint of frost, where that tillage radish will stay green for the entire winter, and it'll have that bulb that the deer can eat. We've gone with enough to boost your soil, but at the same time, not too much to take away from your soil building attributes. You have a few seed varieties as opposed to 10, 12, 15, or 20. But we have a good combination to give you a solid volume and attraction, or I wouldn't be planting it. Because ultimately, if I'm not attracting deer to these plantings at the highest degree that I can, then the plantings are a waste. Because my goal of planting food plots is not just to improve the soil. It was really cool back here, but even then I was mixing in clover eventually, third, fourth year brassica. So I was really incorporating a lot of blends so I could have a high attraction. And it was different in the UP of Michigan because there's nothing green growing. We didn't have any ag fields. We didn't have mass crops to compete with, any fruit trees, any acorns, anything like that. Even their beech nut was really, really light. We didn't even have a lot of regeneration with clear cuts because it was federal land. They weren't clear cutting anything by us. So we didn't have a lot of cuttings or browse for the deer. So there was a little bit different because that green really stands out. But even then we incorporated variety and diversity. That's what you need to do to build your soil. Rotations, constant rotations, or you'd have the buckwheat during the summertime, rye, clover, brassicas, tillage radish going into the fall. Soil boosters, while at the same time having a great combination, but not too much that we diluted the value of each, but enough that we had great attraction compared to anything else in the area. That's why we came up with a food plot company. I want to do this. These are my own personal blends. These are what I plant and what I use. And at the same time, there's so much you can do to your soil to improve it. You gotta stick with the basics. The proof is in the results. It's amazing to see these right here. Even going back and looking at these now over 20 years later, it's pretty cool to see these. And I'm happy I kept these. Happy I wrote about it. Again, you can look up the article. I'll try to remember to include the link in the description. I'm sure I'll end up adding it in the comments if someone asks to. But great things you can do with your soil without sacrificing the attraction you have for deer. And ultimately, you can accomplish what you set out to buying your land in the first place, which was not just to improve the soil. It was to actually have a great deer hunt, great deer habitat, and to give yourself a really enjoyable experience with your land in general as we head into this fall and every fall beyond. Folks, I want to make sure you check out my web class video series, whether it's how to design your food plot program or how to design your property in general. And we have a new one coming out that'll be how to hunt the rut. But these bucks back here are a testament. Some of these bucks go back to '93. They're even in different states. I urge you to check out those web classes so that you can help yourself, help your land, help your hunt. The link is in the description. And also for those that have tried them out, I encourage you to offer some feedback in the comments below. Thank you.